The Indiana Fever just beat the New York Liberty by 20 points. Caitlyn Clark dropped 17 points and 8 assists. By every measure, this should have been a straightforward, dominant performance to celebrate heading into the playoffs. But nobody is talking about the scoreboard right now.
The Indiana Fever cruised to another victory against the New York Liberty. A few things that stood out to me, I just don't understand. How does everybody get calls? Brianna Stewart, Kelsey Mitchell, but Caitlyn Clark, you could literally grab her face and they don't call a foul. You could push her in midair, which we saw in this game. They don't call a foul.
You just heard that. A referee watched Caitlyn Clark get grabbed in the face and did absolutely nothing. No whistle, no call, not even a glance in her direction. And that wasn't even the most shocking moment of this game. Not even close. Because what the cameras caught in this game, the hits, the grabs, the reversed calls, and the officials who watched all of it and kept their whistles in their pockets, has the entire basketball world asking the same question right now. Is Caitlyn Clark being deliberately left unprotected? And if so, why is nobody doing anything about it? Before this game even found its rhythm, before the crowd fully settled in and the energy of the building reached its peak, something happened that set the tone for everything that followed. Not a big shot. Not a momentum swing. Not a controversial coaching decision. Something far more troubling than any of that. And the person responsible was not a role player trying to make a name for herself. It was Jonquel Jones, a veteran, an experienced professional, someone who knows exactly what she is doing when she sets a screen and where her body is positioned when she does it. Jones is the same player who, during Clark's rookie year, set a screen so violent and so reckless that it reportedly ruptured Clark's eardrum. Think about what that actually means physically. An eardrum rupture is not a minor inconvenience. It is a serious injury that affects balance, hearing, and the ability to function normally on a basketball court. It is the kind of injury that, when caused by another player's deliberate physical positioning, demands a conversation about accountability. That conversation never really happened in any meaningful public way. And now here, we are in a new season watching the exact same situation play out between the exact same two people.
All right, so let's get in all the highlights. Monique Billings with the basket to start the game. Then this is what I'm talking about. Look at this. Caitlyn Clark takes a shoulder. She's leaned forward with her shoulder right to Caitlyn Clark's temple. She's not standing straight up. To me, that's bullcrap, and I would be pissed if I was Caitlyn Clark too.
You heard the announcer, called it a great screen. And that right there is the part that should stop you cold, because Jones was not standing straight up in a textbook screen position. She was leaning forward, bent into the play, with her shoulder blade angled directly toward Clark's head. Her body was not vertical. Her positioning was not neutral. She was moving into the contact rather than absorbing it from a stationary position, which is the entire basis of what makes a screen legal in the first place. And the official standing within clear view of this play decided it was not worth a whistle, not worth a conversation, not worth even a look in Clark's direction to check if she was okay. What makes the broadcast call even harder to process is the context sitting right behind it. If the announcer calling it a great screen had any awareness of what happened between these two players last season, the eardrum, the injury, the pattern of physical play Jones has brought to every matchup with Clark, the word great would not have left their mouth. It would have been replaced by concern, by acknowledgement that what just happened was not clean basketball, but a continuation of something that has been visible for over a year now. Instead, the game moved on, Clark shook it off, and the moment was buried under the next possession like it never happened. And before anyone reaches for the argument that this is isolated, that it is one play in one game and reading too much into it, let's go back to where this started. Because the history between these two players is not a secret, and it is not ambiguous.
They don't call a foul. And then we have Jonquel Jones. In Caitlyn Clark's rookie year, she set a screen so hard on Caitlyn Clark, it ruptured her eardrum. And then she sets one of those screens where Caitlyn Clark was obviously blindsided. And you hear the announcer say that was a good screen. I don't care if she was still or not. She was bent over.
Same player, same target, a full season apart. And the result is identical both times. Jones walks away without a call, Clark walks away absorbing the kind of contact that would have drawn a whistle, a conversation, and probably a warning on virtually any other player in this league. That is not bad luck. That is not two unfortunate coincidences stacking on top of each other across different games in different seasons. That is a pattern with a name on it and a face attached to it, and it has been happening in plain sight without any meaningful response from the officials responsible for preventing exactly this kind of thing. The eardrum incident from the rookie year was not treated as the serious moment it deserved to be treated as. There was no visible accountability, no public acknowledgement from the league, no indication that anything was being monitored more closely going forward. And so what happened? The same player came back in the next season, set the same kind of reckless screen on the same target, and walked away clean again. That is what happens when the absence of accountability creates a vacuum. The behavior that should have been corrected simply continues because nothing stopped it. What made the situation in this game even more infuriating was the way it was absorbed into the broadcast without friction. The crowd reacted. Clark's teammates saw it. Anyone watching at home with functioning eyes could see what happened. But the people whose entire job is to manage the physical safety of the players on that court, the officials, the people with the whistles, looked at that play and determined it met the standard for legal basketball. That determination is indefensible when you look at the footage. And it set the tone for an officiating performance that only got worse as the game went on. Because the screen, as bad as it was just the beginning. The moment that broke through to a national audience was still coming, and it was caught on camera from an angle that removed every possible argument from anyone trying to defend what happened. There are moments in sports that transcend the game itself. Moments that stop being about basketball and start being about something larger, about fairness, about accountability, about whether the systems in place to protect athletes are actually functioning the way they are supposed to. This was one of those moments. And the reason it hit as hard as it did is because there was no ambiguity in it, no gray area to argue over, no camera angle that softened what happened or made it look less severe than it was. Brianna Stewart reached out and grabbed Caitlyn Clark's face. Not incidental contact in traffic, not an awkward collision where hands ended up in the wrong place during a contested play, a deliberate grab to the face. And the referee, positioned with a direct, completely unobstructed sightline to the play, standing in exactly the spot an official is supposed to stand to observe exactly this kind of contact, watched it happen in real time and kept the whistle in his pocket. Did not move, did not react, did not give any indication that what he just witnessed registered as something that required his attention.
Like, it's the exact opposite on both sides of the court. And this is what really made me mad. Like, Brianna Stewart grabs her face and the referee's looking right at it. When you see the other view, look at that referee. Grabbed her face and it's not a foul. What are they looking at? And that was a foul on the other end for Jonquel Jones. But this isn't. Look at the ref.
Look at where that official is standing in that frozen frame. Look at the direction his eyes are pointed. There is no crowd blocking his view. There is no other player cutting across his sightline at the moment of contact. He is not turned away from the play. He is not caught in the middle of tracking movement on the other side of the court. He is standing in a position that gives him a direct, clear, unobstructed view of exactly what is happening. And what is happening is a player grabbing another player's face in the middle of a professional basketball game. And he decides it does not warrant a response. That is the detail that matters most. And it is the detail that gets lost when people try to frame this as just another bad call in a game full of them. A bad call that results from an official being out of position is a mistake. A bad call that results from the play developing too quickly for a human being to track every element of it is understandable. This is neither of those things. This official was in position. This official had time. This official had a clear view. The decision not to call what he saw was a conscious one, and the camera angle makes that impossible to credibly dispute. The reaction from people watching was immediate, and it was widespread. Clips of this play were being shared on social media during the game itself. Not after the final buzzer, not in the post-game analysis window, but while the game was still being played. People watching at home were stopping mid-game to send this clip to each other because they could not process what they were seeing and needed confirmation that someone else was seeing the same thing. That is not a normal reaction to a missed foul call in a regular season basketball game. That is a reaction to something that felt fundamentally wrong in a way that people could not ignore even if they wanted to. What deepens the frustration is the comparison sitting right next to it in the same game. Brianna Stewart visited the free throw line repeatedly throughout this game. And to be fair, Stewart is a skilled player who understands how to use her body to draw contact, and she is good at it. Some of those calls may have been entirely legitimate. But when you hold the full picture of this game in your head, simultaneously, what Clark absorbed without a call versus what Stewart received on the other end, the contrast does not look like the natural variation of officiating across a 40-minute game. It looks like two players operating under two completely different sets of rules in the same building, with the same officials calling the same game. The face grab became the moment that broke through to the widest audience because it was the clearest single example. But the people who had been watching the entire game knew that it was not an isolated incident. It was the most visible moment in a pattern that had been building since the opening tip, the screen to the temple, the contact that went unpenalized, the fouls that were called in the wrong direction. By the time Stewart grabbed Clark's face and the official watched it happen, the game had already been telling this story for 3 quarters. That moment just made it impossible for anyone to look away. And what came directly before that clip? The reversed calls, the phantom fouls, the officiating that penalized the Fever for things that were not fouls while ignoring things that clearly were. That was a whole separate layer of what went wrong in this building on this night. If the missed fouls on Clark were the most visible part of the officiating story in this game, the reversed calls were the part that made it genuinely maddening to watch as a Fever fan. Because there is a particular kind of frustration that comes from watching your team absorb contact, look to the officials for a call, and then watch that same official turn around and blow the whistle against your team on the very next touch. It is the kind of thing that makes you feel like the game is being run on a tilted floor. And in this game, the floor was very clearly tilted. The pattern showed up early, and it showed up consistently. Clark taking contact and getting called for the offensive foul instead of drawing the defensive one. Players around her getting grabbed and the call going the other direction. The Fever competing physically and clean and somehow ending up on the wrong side of the whistle at the moments when it mattered most. This was not random noise in the officiating. This had a direction, and that direction pointed away from Indiana on possession after possession.
And this is what I was talking about. She gets pushed with 2 hands right in her chest, and the refs just choose not to call it because it's Caitlyn Clark, but they call offensive fouls on her. Monique Billings, again, like I said, we got to get this down before the playoffs start. Lexi Hall from the corner, it was great to see her get involved on the offensive side of things. We know she's going to bring it on defense, but
2 hands directly into the chest, in the open floor. The kind of contact that any official in any professional basketball league on the planet should be reaching for their whistle on before the play even finishes. Clark absorbs it, keeps her footing, keeps moving, and plays through it because that is what she has been conditioned to do throughout her entire time in this league. And the official, who had a view of the play, swallows the whistle completely and lets the game continue like that contact never happened. Now pause on that for a second and think about what that moment communicates to everyone on that court. It communicates to Clark that she is not going to get that call no matter how clean the contact is. It communicates to the Liberty defender that she can be physical with Clark without consequence. It communicates to both teams that the threshold for what constitutes a foul is being applied differently depending on who the contact is happening to. And once that message is sent, once both teams understand that the officiating is operating on a double standard, it changes how the game is played. The team that benefits from the double standard gets more aggressive because they know they can. The team on the wrong side of it has to absorb more and more before any relief comes. That is exactly what unfolded over the course of this game. And nowhere was the double standard more clearly visible than in what happened with Aaliyah Boston.
And I love the guy in the yellow. Watch the guy in the yellow. Yeah, Caitlyn. I think we all felt like the guy in the yellow tonight when she made that basket. And then Caitlyn Clark, this is crazy. Watch this. She grabs Aaliyah Boston and they call a 3-second violation on Aaliyah Boston instead of a foul on Jonquel Jones. But Brianna Stewart gets the foul called.
Aaliyah Boston gets grabbed, not nudged, not bumped in a way that could be called incidental. Grabbed in a way that is visible from the broadcast camera without needing to slow the footage down or zoom in to confirm the contact. And the official's response is to call a 3-second violation on Boston, on the player being grabbed. The player initiating the illegal contact walks away without a call, and the player on the receiving end of that contact picks up the violation. In what version of basketball does that make sense? Then the camera moves to the other end of the floor, and Brianna Stewart draws a foul for contact that looked like a fraction of what Boston just absorbed in silence. Same game, same officials, same rulebook sitting on the table at the scorer's table. And completely different outcomes depending on which team's player is involved in the contact. That is not officiating variation. That is officiating with a preferred outcome built into it, and the camera caught it in a way that is impossible to explain away. Sophie Cunningham experienced the same version of this double standard in a different moment. A Liberty defender's arm comes around and makes contact with Cunningham clearly enough that it registers on the broadcast without any need for a replay or a zoom. The whistle blows, and the foul goes on Cunningham. The player who initiated the grab is clean. The player who absorbed it picks up the foul. Rewind that clip as many times as you want, and the result is the same every single time. Lexi Hall got caught in the same current. She picked up a foul in this game that viewers at home were genuinely confused by, not the kind of confusion that comes from a close call where reasonable people could disagree, but the kind that comes from watching something happen and genuinely not being able to identify what the call was for. Meanwhile, on a separate play, Jonquel Jones collided directly with Hall in a situation where Hall had nowhere to go and no realistic way to avoid the contact. Nothing called. Game moves on. What this kind of reversed call pattern does to a team over the course of a game goes well beyond the individual possessions where the bad calls happen. When your players are picking up fouls for things that are not fouls, the coaching staff has to respond to that reality. Rotation minutes get adjusted to protect players who are in foul trouble they should not be in. Aaliyah Boston, one of the most important interior players on this Fever roster, was managing foul trouble in this game that traced directly back to calls that should not have gone against her. That foul trouble limited her aggressiveness in moments where Indiana needed her to be at her most physical and most assertive. The bad calls did not just affect the possessions where they happened. They rippled forward through the entire game. The Fever won anyway, by 20, despite all of it. And the way they competed through an officiating environment that was working against them at every turn is a story that deserves to be told fully and honestly, separate from the outrage about what the officials did and did not call. There is a version of this story that gets told in certain corners of basketball media where the officiating issues get used as an excuse, where the implication is that Indiana needed favorable calls to win, that the performance was propped up by circumstances rather than talent and execution. That version of the story is completely disconnected from what actually happened on the court in this game. So let's talk about what actually happened, because it deserves a level of honesty and directness that it is not always given. Caitlyn Clark played a back-to-back game, her first back-to-back since her rookie year. The physical toll that carries in the legs, in the reaction time, in the energy available for late-game execution, is something that even elite professional athletes feel in ways that show up on the court. She absorbed contact from the opening minutes that went unpenalized. She watched a referee stare directly at a foul on her face and call nothing. She picked up offensive fouls for contact that was not hers. And she finished with 17 points and 8 assists in a game her team won by 20. In that context, that performance is not just good. It is a statement about what kind of competitor she is at a fundamental level. The assists are the number that deserves more attention than it typically receives in the post-game conversation around Clark. 8 assists in this game were not 8 simple passes to open players standing in obvious spots on the floor. These were passes that required Clark to read the defense before the play developed, identify the right option under pressure, and deliver the ball with the timing and precision that separates a great passer from a good one. Threading the ball into Aaliyah Boston before the help defense could collapse. Hitting Kelsey Mitchell in stride on the wing so Mitchell could attack before the closeout arrived. Finding cutters in windows that were open for less than a second before the defense rotated. That is not passive playmaking. That is active, intelligent, demanding basketball being executed at a high level while dealing with everything else that was happening around her. Kelsey Mitchell was the other defining story of this game, and she deserves every word written about her performance. 10 consecutive games with 20 or more points. And with this game, she tied Caitlyn Clark's own record for the Indiana Fever. That is not a minor footnote in the story of this season. That is a player operating at the absolute peak of her abilities at the exact moment when her team needs her most. Mitchell scoring from pull-up range, from the three-point line, driving to the rim, getting to the free throw line. She is presenting opposing defenses with a problem that has no clean solution. When Clark's gravity is pulling help defenders out of position, and Mitchell is in this kind of rhythm, the Fever offense becomes genuinely difficult to defend in ways that go beyond any individual matchup. Her jab step in the first half, the one that left a defender completely off balance and opened the three-pointer, was a reminder of why she belongs in every conversation about the best guards operating in this league right now. It was not just the execution of the move that was impressive. It was the timing of it, the way she read the defender's weight distribution and attacked the exact moment when the advantage was greatest. That is a high-level skill being deployed at a high-level moment, and it deserves to be recognized as such. Aaliyah Boston brought exactly what Indiana needed from her in the interior throughout this game. Offensive rebounds that extended possessions when the offense stalled. Putbacks that came from relentless positioning and a refusal to let the ball hit the floor without a fight. Physical presence inside that forced the defense to account for her, even while managing foul trouble that she should not have been in. Her 33-pointers on the year tells a story about how much her game has developed beyond the post-up role that opponents used to feel comfortable defending her in. When Boston can step outside and make defenses pay, the entire floor opens up in ways that benefit everyone around her. Sophie Cunningham connected from three-point range multiple times in this game, and the value of that goes beyond her individual point total. When Cunningham is hitting from the perimeter, the floor spacing that creates changes the mathematical reality of the defense. Help defenders who might otherwise collapse on drives have to respect the corner threat. The paint becomes more accessible. Clark and Mitchell get cleaner looks in the mid-range because the defense cannot afford to send extra bodies inside. One player hitting shots from deep creates better conditions for 4 other players simultaneously. And Cunningham has been doing exactly that at a level that makes Indiana's offense significantly harder to defend as a complete unit. Lexi Hall and Hines, Allen both contributed in ways that speak directly to what this team is building as a complete roster. Hall knocking down threes, competing defensively, being exactly where she needs to be before the play arrives. Allen going coast to coast and converting over Brianna Stewart in traffic, a play that required athleticism, composure, and the confidence to attack in a high-pressure moment. These are the contributions that define what a deep playoff rotation looks like. When your 8th and 9th players step in and make plays that change possessions, you have built something that is genuinely difficult to defend over the course of a 7-game series. The Fever won this game the right way. With talent, execution, and a mental toughness that showed up in every quarter despite everything the officiating situation threw at them. But one question about this game simply refuses to leave. One bad game of officiating is a bad game of officiating. It happens. Officials are human, the game moves fast, contact happens in real time without the benefit of replay or slow motion, and mistakes are a natural part of any sport where human judgment is required in the moment. Nobody reasonable is arguing that officials need to be perfect. What people are arguing loudly, with documented evidence, and with growing frustration, is that what Clark experiences in game after game is not the result of human error applied equally across both teams. It is a pattern with a specific direction. And that direction has been consistent enough, for long enough, that calling it random error no longer holds up. The conversation about officiating around Clark did not start with this game against the Liberty. It started in her first WNBA games, and it has been building ever since. Analysts who track foul call data across the league have noted repeatedly that Clark receives fewer calls relative to the contact she absorbs compared to other players operating at her usage level and her positional role in the offense. That is not a fan complaint sourced from loyalty or emotional investment in a particular player. That is a data observation that multiple independent sources covering this league have pointed to separately. The numbers tell a story that aligns with what the video footage shows game after game. What makes the pattern particularly striking is its consistency across different opponents, different venues, different officiating crews. This is not a situation where one particular group of officials has a demonstrated bias against one player. The missed calls and the reversed fouls have shown up across enough different games and enough different crews that the individual official explanation does not fully account for what is being observed. When a trend persists across different personnel in different contexts, the question of why it is happening becomes much harder to answer with simple explanations about individual human error. There are several theories circulating in basketball communities right now about what is driving this pattern, and they are worth laying out clearly, not as established facts, but as the conversations that are genuinely happening among people who follow this league closely. The first and most widely discussed theory is that officials are deliberately giving Clark less protection because they do not want to be perceived as manufacturing a star narrative around the league's most famous player. The logic being that calling every touch on Clark a foul would look like the league is propping up its biggest attraction, rather than letting the game play itself. So officials are toward letting contact on Clark go, even contact that would draw a whistle on other players, because the alternative feels like overcorrection in the opposite direction. Analysts who have raised this theory point to the fact that the missed calls on Clark are not random. They consistently run in the direction of undercalling fouls on her, specifically, rather than overcalling them. The second theory is more uncomfortable to discuss and involves the internal dynamics of the league itself. Clark's arrival in the WNBA was genuinely seismic in terms of visibility, revenue, and public attention. Viewership numbers, ticket sales, merchandise, and broadcast interest all shifted significantly in ways that are documented and publicly available. Not everyone inside the league has embraced that shift with equal enthusiasm, and speculation has grown in basketball communities that there is a cultural resistance to Clark being fully elevated and protected at the level her talent demands. Whether that resistance reaches into officiating decisions on the floor is something that cannot be stated as fact. But the conversation is real, it has been happening since her first season, and it is not going away. The third angle is less conspiratorial and more institutional. The WNBA officiating has faced criticism for consistency issues that predate Clark's arrival and affect players across the entire league. Under this theory, Clark is simply the most visible example of a broader problem because of how intensely her games are watched and analyzed. The missed calls and reversed fouls are not specifically targeted at her. They are the product of a league-wide officiating quality issue that has not been adequately addressed at an institutional level. The challenge with this explanation is that when you sit with the specific footage from specific games, the contrast between what Clark receives and what other stars receive in the same game with the same officials is difficult to attribute to general inconsistency alone. What is not theory and not speculation is the footage. The screen to the temple in the first 2 minutes of this game. The face grab with the official in perfect position watching it happen. The two-handed chest push in the open floor with no call. The reversed violation on Aaliyah Boston. The foul called against Cunningham for contact she did not initiate. These are documented moments from a single game that happened on camera in front of thousands of people and millions watching at home. The pattern that emerges from those moments does not require a theory to explain. It is visible to anyone who watches the footage with honest eyes. the league's public response to the ongoing conversation about Clark's officiating has been essentially non-existent. No acknowledgement of the pattern. No visible accountability for officials involved in the most clearly wrong calls. No public indication that anything is being evaluated or addressed internally. For a growing number of people covering and watching this league, that silence is its own form of communication. And the playoffs approaching on the calendar are only going to amplify every dimension of this conversation. Before getting into what the critics say after a game like this one, it is worth establishing what actually happened so the gap between reality and the narrative being constructed around it is fully visible. The Indiana Fever won by 20 points. Caitlyn Clark played a back-to-back, her first since her rookie year, absorbed unpenalized physical contact from the opening tip, dealt with an officiating environment that was measurably working against her and her team, and still produced 17 points and 8 assists. Those are the facts of the performance. Those are the things that happened on the court in real time. Now here is what a certain segment of basketball commentary will do with those facts. They will find the angle, and there is always an angle, that reframes the performance as insufficient, incomplete, or propped up by circumstances rather than talent. If the raw numbers look strong, the conversation shifts to efficiency. If the efficiency looks good, the conversation shifts to the quality of opposition. If the opposition was legitimate, the conversation shifts to what her teammates contributed and whether she deserves credit for the win. The goalposts are not just moving. They have been engineered to move specifically in response to whatever she does, so that no performance she puts together can ever fully satisfy the standard being applied to her. This is worth examining beyond just the fairness question, because it has a practical effect on how the public understanding of her career is being formed in real time. When casual fans who are not watching every game are consuming content about Clark through the filter of bad faith commentary, they get a fundamentally distorted picture of what she is actually doing on the basketball court. They get told that she had a quiet night when she had 17 and 8. They get told that the win was about her teammates when her passing was the engine that created half of her teammates' best opportunities. They get told that the back-to-back context does not matter when it absolutely matters for every other player in the league who is discussed with any degree of fairness. The standard being applied to Clark is genuinely unlike anything applied to any other player in this league. Other WNBA stars have their performances assessed against reasonable expectations, evaluated in the context of the actual game, and discussed with the basic assumption that a good performance deserves to be recognized as a good performance. Clark gets something structurally different. The assessment of her games begins from a predetermined conclusion and works backward to find supporting evidence for that conclusion rather than starting with what happened and building an honest evaluation from there. That is not sports analysis. That is something else wearing sports analysis as a costume. What makes the double standard in coverage particularly striking is how cleanly it mirrors the double standard in officiating. In both cases, the threshold shifts specifically when Clark is involved. In officiating, the threshold for what constitutes a foul gets raised when she is the one being fouled. Contact that draws a whistle on other players gets waved off when it happens to her. In coverage, the threshold for what constitutes a good performance gets raised when she is the one being evaluated. Performances that would be celebrated for other players get reframed as insufficient or qualified in ways that strip them of their actual value. Same mechanism, same direction, different arena. What Clark has demonstrated in response to all of it is probably the defining characteristic of her time in this league so far. She does not adjust her game to manage the expectations of people covering her in bad faith. She does not shrink from physical contact because the officials are not calling it. She does not play conservatively to protect her stats from the critical angles that are going to be applied to them regardless of what she does. She plays basketball at the highest level she is capable of playing it every single night, and she lets the performance exist on its own terms whether or not it receives the honest evaluation it deserves. The 17 and 8 in a back-to-back, in a game where she was absorbing contact from the opening minutes, where she was dealing with reversed calls going against her team, where the officiating environment was as difficult as anything she has faced this season. That performance is not a quiet night. It is not a disappointing showing that falls short of expectations. It is a high-level performance delivered under genuinely difficult conditions by a player who refused to let those conditions change the way she competed. That is the accurate description of what happened, and it deserves to be stated clearly and without qualification. The broader context of what Indiana is building amplifies why the honest evaluation of Clark's individual performances matters so much. This team is heading into the playoffs with real momentum, real depth, and real offensive firepower that opposing coaches are going to have to solve. The ability of those coaches to game plan against Clark specifically, to know what she is actually capable of, where her strengths are most dangerous, and how to deploy defensive resources most effectively against her, is shaped in part by how honestly her performances are being analyzed and discussed. Bad faith coverage of her games creates a distorted map that helps nobody and serves nothing except the particular narrative preferences of the people producing it. The Fever are better than the narrative around their best player, and the playoffs are coming whether the narrative catches up to reality or not. The regular season is in its final stretch, and the clearest picture yet of what Indiana has built is coming into focus in a way that the rest of the league should be paying very close attention to. Because this is not a team that is winning because the schedule has been kind or because the opposition has been below average. This is a team that won a game by 20 points against a legitimate opponent while dealing with an officiating environment that was measurably working against them at both ends of the floor. That is a meaningful data point about who this team is and what they are capable of when everything is not going their way. The foundation of what makes Indiana genuinely difficult to prepare for as a playoff opponent starts with the Clark-Mitchell dynamic and the way it forces defensive decision-making into impossible territory. When Clark has the ball, the defense has to respect her ability to attack off the dribble, her three-point range, which is real and consistent, and her passing vision, which turns any defensive commitment into an opportunity for a teammate. That level of attention leaves Mitchell operating in spaces that a player of her quality can absolutely exploit. And when Mitchell is in the form she has been in over this 10-game stretch of 20-point performances, exploiting those spaces is exactly what she does. The streak itself, 10 consecutive games with 20 or more points, tying Clark's own record for the franchise, is a number that carries weight beyond the streak's statistical novelty. It tells you something about where Mitchell's confidence is right now, about how clearly she is seeing the game, and about how effectively she is executing in moments where the opposition knows she is a primary option and is scheming to take her away. The best offensive runs happen when a player is beating defenses that are prepared for them. Mitchell has been doing that for 10 straight games. That is not a hot streak built on favorable circumstances. That is a player who is elevated to a different level at the right time. Aaliyah Boston's role in what the Fever are building is one of the most underappreciated stories of this season. She is not just a post presence who scores when the ball finds her in favorable positions. She is a complete interior player who affects the game in ways that the box score only partially captures, screening to create advantages for Clark and Mitchell, making reads off the pass to find open teammates when the defense collapses, fighting for offensive rebounds in situations where most players have already accepted the possession as over. Her 33-pointers on the season represent a genuine offensive expansion that has made her harder to defend and more valuable to Indiana's spacing in ways that compound the difficulty of the Clark-Mitchell problem for opposing defenses. Lexi Hall's development over the course of this season has been one of the quiet building blocks of what Indiana is putting together. The things she does well are the things that tend to get overlooked in highlight packages and stat line analysis. The screens that create the advantages Clark uses to find open teammates, the defensive positioning that forces opponents into tougher looks than they wanted, the floor spacing on the perimeter that keeps driving lanes open for her more offensively prominent teammates. When she added the ability to knock down three-pointers to that package of contributions, she became a player that opposing defenses genuinely have to account for in their preparation. You cannot simply ignore her on the perimeter anymore, and that attention she commands creates opportunities for everyone around her. Hines Allen's coast-to-coast finish over Brianna Stewart was a single play in a game Indiana won by 20, but the significance of it extends beyond the 2 points it put on the board. Allen is a player with real athletic ability who has been working her way back into meaningful minutes, and that play, the decision to push in transition, the commitment to attacking all the way to the rim, the composure to convert in traffic over a shot blocker, is the kind of play that tells you a player is ready. Ready to contribute when the moments get bigger and the margin for mistake gets smaller. In a playoff rotation where the coaching staff needs to trust every player they put on the floor, having Allen ready and confident is a genuine asset. Sophie Cunningham's three-point shooting and her defensive physicality give Indiana something that is easy to undervalue until you remove it from the equation and see what the offense looks like without it. The floor spacing she creates when she is hitting from deep is not just a nice addition to Indiana's offensive toolkit. It is a structural element of how their best offensive sets function. When the corner three-pointer is a real threat, the help defense cannot collapse with full commitment, and that changes the mathematics of every drive, every post entry, and every pick-and-roll action that Clark and Mitchell run. The officiating problem is real, and the league needs to address it before the games that actually determine who advances and who goes home begin in earnest. The clips from this game are going to be part of that conversation, whether the league engages with them or not. But what Indiana has shown, in this game and across the stretch of games leading into the postseason, is that they have the talent, the depth, and the mental toughness to compete and win even when the environment is not fair. The question heading into the playoffs is simple. How far can this team go when everything is working? Because even when things are not working, even when the officiating is a disaster and the physical play is going unpenalized, they just beat a good team by 20. The Fever won this game by 20. Clark had 17 and 8 in a back-to-back. Mitchell is on a historic run. The depth showed up when it mattered. By every honest measure, Indiana is building something real, and the performance against the Liberty was another piece of undeniable evidence for that argument. But the officiating conversation is not going away. A referee watching a face grab with a direct sightline and calling nothing is not a moment that gets forgotten quietly. The screen to the temple in the first 2 minutes. The two-handed chest push with no response. The reversed violation on Boston. The foul on Cunningham for contact she never initiated. All of it is on camera. All of it is documented. And none of it has generated any visible response from the people responsible for running fair games. The Fever are good enough to win despite all of it. They proved that tonight. But the question worth sitting with is this. If the best player in this league can get grabbed in the face with a referee watching directly and nothing gets called, what does that say about how this game is actually being managed?